梁燕欢迎来到我们的直播间。今天我们照惯例还是进行每周一早上9点的直播。好，今天主要是请来了奥克兰大学的 Alex 来给我们讲解一下数字货币和它的将来的发展趋势。那在之前，我们先review 一下我们的一个服务哈。我们是 NZ Funds 的签约的 advisor， 所以 NZ Funds 主要做 KV Saver Scheme。好 ，KV Saver 呢是新西兰的一个全民储蓄计划，在这里头你能看到哈，我们比较了几种KV Saver Scheme。那么它是指每年您自己放一部分的钱，雇主放一部分的钱，然后呢有政府投资的一点点钱，然后更多的就是整体的一个投资回报。所以呢 NZ Funds 它的 Lifestyle Circle 哈，让您将来回报更高。它为什么能回报更高呢？我们是通过每周一早上的直播的讲解来告知大家这个周、这个月或者这个季度的投资方向在哪里，您应该怎么样来解决哈，或者您应该怎么样调整自己的投资方向。那么在 NZ Funds 最先进的这个小 app 当中，您可以选择是Life Circle 还是 Select Circle 哈。OK， 好，我们的嘉宾已经进入直播间了哈。那我们就开始哈。
Look, people are just logging in now. So what I was going to do, so I'll just give you a quick introduction and then we'll get straight into it. I know you've got a hard stop at 9:45 given you're full of meetings and things today, so we'll just get cracking. But so hello and welcome everyone to the Monday call. I'm James Grigger, Chief Investment Officer at NZ Funds. It is Monday the 9th of May. While the use of cryptocurrency continues to be debated, the blockchain technology behind it is transforming financial systems and digital commerce. But what is blockchain, how does it work, and how far-reaching could its impact be? Associate Professor Alex Sims from the University of Auckland joins us to understand the exponential rise of blockchain and the assets it supports, such as cryptocurrency, NFTs, and smart contracts, some of which are in NZ Funds portfolios. Alex has taught in the Department of Commercial Law since 2000 on a wide range of commercial law courses at undergrad and postgrad level. From 2022, she will be teaching a master's level paper on technologies and compliance, which deals primarily with blockchain, distributed ledger technologies, and smart contracts. So again, Alex, thank you so much for joining us this morning on this Monday morning. And look, I wonder if, before we sort of get into it proper, if you could perhaps tell us a bit about your journey and how you got into it, because you've been teaching since 2000, which I'm not sure if really anything like this ever actually existed at that point. And so how did you transition, I guess, your career in academia to blockchain?
Okay, yes, I've been since 2000. Makes me feel old, but anyway. I've always been very interested in technology. I think it's probably because my father was an early adopter of things. But most of my research was on copyright law, which is really about technology. But then the actual with blockchain, I knew I'd heard about Bitcoin, but I just thought it was this weird internet money. And then in 2016, I listened to 2 podcasts back to back because I listened to lots of things. One was from a tech podcast I listened to from Canada, and one was Radio New Zealand. And they're talking about blockchain, smart contracts, Ethereum. And I listened to them, and basically almost my brain exploded, and I realized this would change everything. And so I then almost like fell down the rabbit hole. But it was just that. I mean, most people don't have that. They sort of think this is a bit strange, a bit weird. But I could just see how so many of our systems and processes and the law in general, it's all predicated around certain ways of doing things. And this is something different. And it is technology, but it allows things. And also, just very quickly, I mean, I was sort of, what I find a bit strange was that when the internet came, you know, in the sort of the mid-90s, when this began to get popular, I didn't really think much of it. And it was like with the computer, well, you've got a computer, so what? So this is the second time round. And you think of the internet as being how much it's transformed almost everything, but it's been gradual and slow. And actually, one of the things I often do in talks is show a video. It's only a 2-minute long one. If you search about what is the internet on the Today Show, I can give you the link afterwards. And it's from 94, 95, and they're talking about the internet, and exactly the same thing has happened with blockchain. You know, people just can't sort of, you know, they're used to the way things are working and they can't foresee anything. But what's quite good about showing that video is people have forgotten that. They've just, because the internet's become part of their lives, and blockchain and different ways of doing things will become part of people's lives, and so sort of almost seamless.
It's almost like you were determined not to, and you get this in the investment world as well, you know, the internet will never catch on, you know, it's just going to be a passing fad. And look where we are now, and I guess there are some people out there who are really curious, yourself included, who have seen this in blockchain as well, and you've got some naysayers, but it feels like we're at the precipice of another really big disruptive, I guess, ecosystem.
Well, and also, I mean, the parallels are very strong because for two reasons. The first is people say, well, our businesses work fine, the banks work fine, everything works fine. But it was like that before the internet, so everything worked fine. I mean, you could send a letter, you could get a courier, it was fine. But, you know, it wasn't that great. Would we go back there now? And the same as things are happening will happen with blockchain. I mean, just a practical thing. You know, you're used to having to wait, 30, 60 days for payment and not be able to, you know, see into anything. And it's, you know, that's just normal. And so, you know, blockchain can sort of remove a whole lot of those issues. And also, almost everything about blockchain is exactly the same as previous technology. When technology is rolled out, you've got the beginning, it does a bit clunky, it's expensive. You know, think of digital cameras. When that first came out, they were really, really bad, and people just laughed at them. And Kodak said, no. One of his employees invented the first digital camera. We won't do that. We'll just continue business as usual. Well, of course, what happened to Kodak? That's gone. Same thing with Netflix. It just happens. It's just the natural evolution of technology.
And so perhaps that's a great segue into going back to a little bit of first principles or what, I guess, from the financial markets point of view, there's such a focus and obsession with the money side, the buying a token or a coin and it goes up in value and that sort of thing. But actually, perhaps the more exciting and long-lasting part of this whole sector is the actual blockchain underneath it. And can you give us a bit of a teaching on what that actually is and how we should think about that, and why back in 2020 you had that brain explosion of how exciting you think this sector is? Do you even call it a sector? I don't even know how you really describe sector or ecosystem or...
I guess an ecosystem, but it was 2016. So.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Well, that's right. No, that's right. Just got to because a lot of people have suddenly jumped on, and it's like, because I was being laughed at in my faculty and other people, and I'm just, you know, and now they're slowly doing, you know, researching in these areas, which is quite ironic. Well, first of all, just quickly, there's no just, when we talk about blockchain, it's not just one, you know this, but for other people, it's not just one blockchain. There are many, many, many different blockchains, and they do different things. And you know, with this sort of the coins and the tokens and things, and people think just focusing on that, yeah, that's only one small part of it. And I was, right from the beginning, I've sort of been saying, I think I wrote something and stuff, you know, forget Bitcoin, you know, blockchain technology, that's what is important. So, yeah, short term, you've got people, you know, a lot of the tokens and things, there's nothing behind them. So, you know, I don't think it's a wise sort of an investment, if people want to see it that way. And also the other thing where a lot of people actually making the money is again with anything is supplying the picks and shovels. They're providing services to the sector. And so long term, yes, that's where the money will be. All the consulting firms, EY, KPMG have got big divisions just with their clients who are engaging in these things. It also another thing with a lot of this is, of course, as with any new technology, and it's not so much the innovation, it's the people adopting the innovation. So there's a big resistance to do this. A good example I often use is with Walmart. So Walmart in the US, food safety is a big issue, and people have died through E. coli poisoning. And it takes days using their systems to track down where did this particular romaine lettuce come from. Okay. And many years ago, they trialed using blockchain in their supply chain, and they were able to cut down the time that it took to work out where, say, a pack of mango had come from 6 days. That's what going through their supply chain. Using blockchain, it took 2 seconds. So, 6 days. Yeah, this is not a slight incremental thing. This is completely different. Now, you'd think, wow, all the suppliers would be, well, we want to do this, be on board. Almost all of them said, no, we're not doing this because it means something different. We're used to comfortable with our existing systems. And it took someone like Walmart to say to them, you want to supply us, you need to do this. But again, this has just happened. I mean, I could give you a whole history lesson, which I won't do. But it's not the technology. It's people. People are the sort of the obstacle. I mean, I don't know if any of your people listening know anything about the construction industry. We've had BIM, Building Information Management, for over 20 years. And very few people have been using it. And all of a sudden, people start to use it. So, it's and that's the issue also with investing in businesses that are creating, in the blockchain area, is these things will take a lot of time to come through.
Yeah, you get the feeling that the adoption is really broad in many sectors and industries, but as you say, if it is this mentality of, well, I'm not used to it, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and it sort of takes something like a E. coli outbreak in the supply chain of Walmart to really make a substantial change. On the other hand, there's a lot of small companies, I guess, emerging, but the requirement for capital to keep on emerging and really taking over certain sectors is quite profound. And so, do you believe it will take time for these companies to really start disrupting, or do you think we're now in acceleration mode and you're starting to see a lot of disruption happening as we speak?
It's still very slow. I mean, there's a long way. But the other issue with blockchain is that it's not just, one company, with the internet has a website, okay, and they do that. With blockchain is everybody in that. It doesn't necessarily have to be the whole industry, but say in a supply chain, everyone in that needs to be using that system. Yeah. And that's the reluctance, because it's hard to coordinate people. They don't necessarily need to change their ERMs and their other systems. It can be built above them. But one of the things that people don't like, and also, again, it's not just so much technology, it's a real different way of thinking, is transparency. So far more things are transparent. And people don't like that. They want to have their little silos of information because they're worried about confidentiality and a whole lot of things. But then that's when you have problems with, errors, and you need all that reconciliation to make things correct. Whereas if you're all looking into the same system, a lot of that is removed. But what you can do with, you may not want to know, your supplier may not want you to know what their supplier, how much they are paying and who the supplier is. But you can set it up so that you can't see that particular information, but you can know, for example, that it is a trusted supplier, and there's a whole lot of different things you can do. So it's not necessarily complete transparency, but it's a completely, in that situation, different mindset.
So a lot of blockchains for new technologies, a new way of using, like the supply chain, say in the building industry, a lot of it, I guess, developed from partly financial services and just the inner workings of banks not working as well as perhaps perceived. Are you able to give us sort of a quick overview of why that is and what blockchain's actually disrupting in the financial services sector?
Well, part of it is that reconciliation to check things are correct. I remember one time someone was telling me we were out walking and there was a bank, a big, high-rise with a bank. And they said, look, those 4 floors over there are all people just reconciling between different institutions to check that this information is accurate. That could all basically go away. So there's huge cost savings there. Little things maybe slightly off tangent is things like auditors. So at the moment, you get your auditor and they do a sort of a snapshot. It's a certain point of time, and they can't check every transaction. They just do a selection of it. Whereas if everything is what we call on-chain, then you can actually be verified that it's there, and other people can see in real time what is actually happening. And the other thing with this is with smart contracts, it's not just that. As everyone on this call will know, you can have, within your institution, you can have, authorities, and you need such, people to sign off on things. Whereas those rules and policies not always followed, or people can forge signatures and things like that. And that's why you need, these checks to see that things are being done properly. Or you can automate all that so that people cannot actually do any of that sort of illegal activity. So it's again a different mindset. It's not just having the rules there. You can actually enforce the rules.
That's a really interesting point. When you and I caught up last week, you said something that stuck with me over the weekend, and that was there's a lot of disparaging remarks around, or at least around cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, etc., because it's, I guess, has been adopted early by criminal elements. But actually that happens in a lot of technology, and actually if you think about what you just said, this will decrease the amount of perhaps financial crime that can actually happen in the system.
Exactly, yes. It's not all perfect, but it's a lot of people say, well, we're not going to shift to something until it's 100% perfect, but you're never going to get perfect. So my sort of rule of thumb is it better than what you currently have? And yes, it is. I know lots of people in the banking and finance sectors, including auditors and things, who have moved out of those sectors because they realise that they'll still be there, but a smaller bit, and now they're, in the blockchain, fintech type of world. And I actually feel sorry for the banks in some ways, because I spoke to people in banks, and one person said, they know with fintechs, challenger banks and things like that, but they've got to do business as usual and try to innovate. And what's actually happening with the financial sectors and things with fintech is that you've got new, businesses, whatever, who are coming in and they are specialists, and they're just a small bit, but doing it very, very well. And often the profitable bits of the banks and taking that away. So yes, you're not going to have a big competitor who's going to come along and take all of your business, but it is almost death by 1,000 cuts. And and banks, of course, have got issues because they've got legacy, infrastructure and policies and things like that. It's very, very difficult for them to, to respond. I think who was it? The chairman of Barclays is on record as saying, banks are a museum of technology with their systems. But again, this is no different from previous, industries. And I struggle because, again, I love history and things, to find an industry or an institution that's actually still around with massive disruption. You think of something like the newspaper industry. That was incredibly powerful. You had new technology come along, like the internet, have the big newspapers been able to take that technology and run with it? Not really. I mean, Twitter's worth probably more than most newspapers in the world combined.
It's not only banks in terms of high street banks either, is it? It's with the onset of things like stablecoin, it's central banks. Central banks are also thinking about what they need to do within the sector. Would you be able to explain what a stable coin is and why the central banks, Reserve Bank included, but the Fed in the US, why are they so nervous about it?
Okay, so the first cryptocurrencies were like Bitcoin and others their price, fluctuates. I get alerts on my phone saying, the price is cratering or, soaring up. So they're very volatile. And so that's not that good for if you want, smart contracts, automatic payments. It's, not that good. So stable coins are coins that are deliberately designed to be stable in price. They can be pegged, say, to the US dollar, the euro, or a basket of currencies, which is similar to what Facebook tried to do a few years ago with Libra to set that up. And so they're very attractive for businesses to use. And when these are being rolled out, that is when the central banks around the world, the Bank for International Settlements, got extremely worried about it. And that's prompted them to accelerate their plans to issue their own central bank digital currencies. Because I know people in New Zealand say, yes, we've got the wonderful banking system, but again, it's what you're used to. It can't accommodate smart contracts. You can't, it will not work. And smart contracts are the key to the exciting bits of blockchain.
And is that smart contract, is that what we've just been, and this is probably will show the naivety of the knowledge base, is smart contracts just what you've been talking about, the blockchain, the ability to link and reconciliate transactions?
It's part of it. So say, for example, on a supply chain, when you've got goods moving between different people in the supply chain, at the moment, if your people are being paid, they're raising invoices, they're being paid 60 days later, you could have that. So as the goods are moving, the payments can be being made automatically. And also, not just the one payment that is then made, distributed out, the tax can be paid at the same time. That can be linked up to, the government getting the money, in real time. And of course, that's very attractive for governments. And another reason why the central banks want to do these central bank digital currencies. It is they've got to do something because also companies will increasingly be using these stable coins within smart contracts because of the utility they offer.
Do you have a view on whether some of these central banks will just use the technology that's already in existence, or are they all going to try and create their own, in which case we'll have another big sway of coins coming on board from all the different central banks?
They'll use their own. I mean, so they won't necessarily, they will not be using public blockchains at all. So there's a wide range of different solutions. But there's lots of issues. I mean, this Reserve Bank's been consulting on this. I think it was last year had one. So there's large issues here. I mean, at the moment, the central banks have, of course, got the upper hand because you can only make tax and other payments in New Zealand dollars.
So when we started, we talked about blockchain. We've talked about stable coins. We've talked a bit about central banks. Now we're going to sort of perhaps in the next sort of 15 minutes or so jump into some of the things that you've really been working on intensely over the past few years, it looks like, and that's things like DAOs, NFTs. Perhaps before we jump into it, maybe give us a bit of a definition of what these technologies are, and hearing about the type of work that you're doing and research that you're looking at would be really interesting.
Okay, I'll start with NFTs because that's sort of the hype at the moment. So NFTs, most people are thinking them as like art, digital art and collectibles and things. But that's only a very small use of them. So, I mean, an NFT could be like a concert ticket, and which does have good utility because, you know, at the moment, say you've got a spare, you want to get to a concert, all the tickets have sold out, and you go online to buy it off someone, you don't know whether that person sent the same PDF to 50 other people, which they do sometimes. Whereas here, it's whoever has that, they can show. And just, you might think, well, so what? But just another quick example. This is in like Rotterdam over in Europe. They had a big problem. You'd have the containers coming in off the ship, and they would send out a code, short code, 6-digit code, to the importer to come, and whoever had the code could pick it up. But what was happening is that employees and other people would get hold of that, and they'd sell that code to somebody else who would come and pick it up. There was millions of euros of things being stolen. So what they did then is they issued a token, which is effectively an NFT, to the importer, and that could not happen. That slashed the rate of theft. So that was a pilot which very quickly got instituted. So it's very, very, you know, incredibly broad. With digital art, NFTs and other things, the rule is, I always say, is it's no different from anything else. Just buy something if you like it. If you're buying something with the expectation the price will rise, well, you know, it's a bit dangerous. But also what they're doing, some of them, the good ones, is creating a community, which a lot of investors aren't interested in. So the ones that are community ones, probably not so much. And again, another quick thing, a lot of the issues that people point out with NFTs, like copyright concerns and other things, that's not new. That was always happening. Because I get trolled by my 17-year-old son, why would I buy this when I can just mouse click it? Well, it's the same. Why would you buy a print when you don't own the original type of thing? So there's no difference there. Now, another segue into DAOs, or DAOs, which are decentralized autonomous organizations, which I've been working on for years, is with these communities and other things can be run by a decentralized autonomous organization rather than a centralized entity. But it's not just these sort of crypto NFTs that are setting up this new structure. There's also, I speak to a lot of people, and people say, well, can we set this new venture up as a DAO? But because it's a exciting buzzword at the moment. But when you do, instead of having a company, if you set up this, it's not like making decisions and then getting the shareholders to vote on it. It's equivalent of the shareholders formulating what everyone else will vote on. So if you think about that, you can quickly see how things can go very quickly wrong.
You've set it up, but you've lost complete control.
Yes. You've set it out to the network. And so what some people might do is they go, okay, well, what we'll do is retain, even if you retain 20% of the voting rights, that's still often enough to sway, because a lot of people won't vote and they won't know what's going on. So a lot of people, they say they're using these new structures, but they're not really. And just on this, you might think, well, this is some weird thing. Well, last year in Australia, there was a select committee set up to look at Australia as a financial fintech place. Anyway, this select committee recommended that Australia change its corporations law, so its company law, to accommodate DAOs. And that has been accepted by the Australian government. So this is not some fringe lunatic thing. And I was really surprised that was the recommendation, because I just thought this would be years away. I've made arguments that they should be recognised, But and they can be used for all different things. You can use them for, non-for-profit purposes. You can use them in place of a trust. So just a broad suite of things. Some of them, because of those issues with, you have some random person putting something forward, and you might have 10,000, of the token holders put forward proposals which people have to vote on. It's not going to work properly. And so they then set up a committee, for example, that might vet the proposals to see whether they're okay. And so you might have some people saying, but that's centralisation, which is, okay. But again, it can be different, because you can have it so that those committee members could be removed at any stage just by the token holders saying, we don't want you, and they're voted out, which again is different from a normal company where you can only remove directors, at AGMs essentially. So it is still different. But another quick thing is with this decentralisation is that people have tried to have decentralised organisations for many, many, many years. But this technology can help, but it doesn't do away with how people act and how people react. And there's a really good quote, which I often use, by someone else, that says that we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. So, and if the people that know a little bit about this area, if you know about the DAO, which was in 2016-17, which crashed and burned, it wasn't the first DAO, there's other ones before that, and that was because these things had not been thought through. The other quick thing with DAOs is that some people say, okay, what we'll do is we don't want to lose control, we want to set it up decentralised, but we want to retain control, so we'll write some rules that can't be changed. But again, that goes against
the whole point of it.
Yes, because and these things need to change, because if you don't change, it will die. And that's actually happened with the DAO, because they couldn't change. When they identified there was a problem, they couldn't do that at all. So
are there good examples in New Zealand of really established DAOs and that are operating and sort of have a lot of people in the community?
There is one. It's called Dash, the Dash DAO, which is earlier than the DAO. It's about 2015. It was set up. There's some. What's interesting is they've got different legal structures, and one of them is actually a trust, which is based in New Zealand. There's number of people earn a full-time income that is paid by the DAO. It's successful, it works well. But what they've done there is, again, you've got this problem of people making proposals and people voting. So to stop a whole lot of proposals coming through, you've got to effectively pay to put the proposal up, because it's a bit like a spam filter. And then instead of everybody voting, there's only about 4,000 people that vote. You might think that's a lot, but there could be a lot more. And so that sort of, that is working. That's working very well.
So Alex, when you think about this ecosystem, and you've got the drivers from the financial side, but also these amazing communities that I guess run themselves in a way and make decisions, how do you see, I know it's probably too hard to think 10 years out, but how do you see this whole system evolving, and do you have sort of some thoughts around where you think we'll get to for not just the early adopters, but for everyday life, us going about our usual days, doing, having NFTs, DAOs, paying by cryptocurrencies? Do you sort of have a vision of where you think the ecosystem will get to?
I've got a few things. First of all, even now, for some industries, when you're setting something up, there's a choice between will you go through, a company, or in this US LLC, or will you set up a DAO? And so that's happening more on the digital world. So, for example, games companies. So some of the people here, their kids might play Fortnite. So the owners of Fortnite is a traditional company structure, corporate structure. But there's other newer games that for metaverses like Decentraland, which are DAOs. So you've got these, already, as I said, these two competing ones. And even though they are communities, people can, investors can still buy tokens in that, and so they can generate a return if they want. And in some ways, it's quite good for people to have capital, coming into these projects, which is needed. But of course, if they're doing that, it's, in the past, someone putting a whole lot of money in might get a board seat type of thing. But, it's not, you get some say, but not too much say. Using for payments and things, I don't know, it's fiat currency, New Zealand dollars are still there, but people already, there is some integration. So I haven't got one, but I know lots of people with Visa credit, I've got a Visa credit card, but they're actually cryptocurrency credit cards. So what they've done is they've loaded cryptocurrency onto it, but when they pay, the merchant gets New Zealand dollars, or if they're over US dollars. So that's already there. And that's actually a deliberate play by Visa to try to have a part of this new industry and not be cut out. SWIFT, so everyone will know about SWIFT, the banking system, that's trialing to use blockchain to use it. So as I said before, I think it will just creep up. It's more and more people have stable coins, and then they'll be able to, if they need to pay tax or something. I seriously think that the countries around the world will start accepting cryptocurrencies as payments and tax. So, for monetary stability,
the revenue for governments.
Yeah, it's a very sort of exciting and scary time for a lot of people. But things change. Again, I love history too much. What we think of as the company, that's quite a recent phenomenon. So it was only 1850, and when the company came in, the structure, there was all sorts of fights over this. People didn't want it to come because it was disrupting what went before. So, if you look across the long arc, and that's what a lot of people fail to see, is that a lot of people, probably not on this call, but other people, they just think what is here has always been here and will always be here. But no, nothing is, everything changes. And so we're on that, again, the transition point.
Well, what a fantastic, quote to end on. Alex, we really appreciate your input and thoughts. I think this is going to be an ever-evolving system, and people like us, and as in, I'm not talking about our listeners, I'm talking about me, in the financial markets, focus so much on the volatility and movement of coins, and when you actually think about the underlying technologies, it truly is a really exciting thing to be, living through, because we're going to see a lot of disruption, a lot of change.
Yes, and I think it's just reading, reading and listening about this, and some people, they say, okay, I can understand how this little thing will change or how it will affect it, but of course it's much broader. And also, another thing I often say is that if you're implementing a blockchain solution, you might think, well, this is really expensive for this thing, but yet there's a whole lot of other things come with it as well, benefits. But it becomes an integrated system. So I just urge people to look into it. Another thing I do, and it won't apply to people on this call, is that when younger people, when they're saying that they're about investing in NFTs and things, and I always say no, just learn about it, because if you learn about it and good, you can get they're screaming out for people in the developers and other people in the industry as well. It is sort of what you need to do, and you just need to be aware of this. And if you dismiss it, you're dismissing it at your peril.
Well, I think I couldn't agree more, and it sounds like you've had many conversations with your 17-year-old son about don't go and do finance and law at university.
No.
Assets and crypto and
No,
blockchain.
no, on that. Sorry, he's going to do actually politics and anthropology.
They probably collide in some ways, those two subjects.
They do, and in fact, I listened to a really good podcast and then read the book. It was about the use of anthropology in financial markets. So one of the, this woman, Gillian Tate or something, I can send you the link. She was able to predict, the GFC and what was really interesting was she studied like Kurdistan marriage rituals. The same things play out. The fact is, it's all about people, and understanding people is just as, if not more important than technology.
Well, thanks so much, Alex, and we hope to get you on again over the course of the next few, months, years, decades, and we can keep ourselves up to speed with what's going on. So we really appreciate your time and keep up the research. We'll be watching and reading and with real interest. So thank you.
That's right. Yeah, and sorry about the beginning of the call.
No, that was me. That was me, not you. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Well, slightly different subject than we normally have in terms of a bit of historical context to digital assets. What I thought we would do for just 5 minutes is touch on the volatility that we've had in financial markets. And it's a relatively simple update because we have been talking about it for quite some time. And the key causes of what's going on in financial markets at the moment is something that is going to be around for at least the foreseeable future. And that is, we have really high inflation, and not just in New Zealand. And the credit that our government gets for causing these high inflation rates is almost a bit too much credit, because this is a global phenomenon, perhaps catalyzed or brought forward by some of the horrible events in Eastern Europe with Russia and Ukraine, but also it was certainly upon us before that. Again, maybe COVID and the lockdowns had a bit to do with it. But you can even, when we think about some of the articles we wrote last year around some of our views on commodities, it really was a phenomenon that started many years ago with the lack of supply and the lack of exploration of commodities, a lot of demand, and with incredibly low interest rates and the amount of money being pumped into financial markets and economies around the world by central banks, we've got this situation with incredibly high inflation. Interest rates now have to reverse and go up to combat that, and this is what we're seeing at the moment. But when do interest rates stop increasing? And that's the big question. And central banks have to, first and foremost, get inflation under control. They have to be cognizant of employment, but the jobs data that we just saw in the US on Friday shows there is absolutely no issue with unemployment in the US, and the same goes for New Zealand, with more jobs created on Friday than expected, and that was in the US. And so we've got this situation with these high inflation and interest rates increasing that is causing volatility in share markets. And last week was a great example where we had the Federal Reserve decision. They decided to increase interest rates by 0.5%, and the share market in the US increased the most it has in many years after an interest rate increase announcement. The market then dropped significantly following that, and we started getting a lot of volatility. In fact, despite the volatility last week, we still haven't reached the lows that we have reached earlier this year. And so with increasing interest rates continuing and nervousnesses about inflation, we think we're going to get weeks like last week for the foreseeable future. And that can be really unsettling for investors, especially those in growth assets, but also in income assets, because changes in interest rates really do affect the income portfolios. And so this is where, and this is a situation which means portfolios can't just rely on the traditional asset classes of bonds and shares in order to generate returns. In fact, despite the volatility, this is the type of environment that actually makes the investment team at NZ Funds incredibly excited. Why is that? Because the asset classes that are moving are the exact asset classes that we can and have been invested in. And this means that despite what goes on in share markets and bond markets, we can still generate returns, both through profiting when interest rates go up, but also being able to get exposure to the main asset classes that cause the inflation in the first place, and that's commodities. At the same time, we've always been very cognizant of downside mitigation. A few weeks ago, we had Universa, which is our downside mitigation manager, present on this call. And despite the technology, which was the live stream wasn't overly successful, but if you do look back at the Spotify or App Store, the Apple podcasts, you'll find the Monday call where you can see that presentation from Universa. Now, Universa mitigates the downside when markets fall by more than 20%. They are kind of like the canary in the coal mine on a large black swan event. And so unforecastable, completely out of the blue, markets drop significantly over a quick period of time. COVID was a good example of this, or some sort of geopolitical event. Universa is going to be there to protect capital of NZ Funds investors. But what about markets like we're facing at the moment, where we're getting a long, protracted drawdown in share markets? Now, this is where the tools that we have within NZ Funds can be used to mitigate that. And that is because we can buy futures and options. And so while we've stayed invested in shares, we're invested in commodities, we're invested in interest rates to participate and profit when interest rates increase. We can also buy options that when markets are volatile and do decrease, we can also mitigate the downside and generate a return to make sure that we've got capital stability. And so these put options, which we've had within the US and Australian share markets, has really protected the capital despite markets not falling more than 20%, and it's actually been helping when markets fall by less than that. So when I look at the performance of the portfolios year to date, when we think about the different types of clients, the performance of an income-orientated client, so predominantly an income with a little bit of inflation and growth, their post-fee return is about 10% year to date to the end of April. And this is versus our reference portfolio of down around almost 7%. So relative performance, 17.5% year to date to April. And when I think about growth-orientated clients, predominantly in growth and inflation portfolios, again, it shows the mitigation we've been able to implement within the portfolios and the returns we've been able to generate in commodities. Post fees, 7.5%. This is for KiwiSaver, but it gives you an indication of what's going on across all of our portfolios, whereas the reference portfolio is down around 8%. Markets are actually down more than that. If we think about US markets, the NASDAQ is down around about 20% off the top of my head. And so that gives a relative performance though versus our reference portfolio of almost 16%. And so this is not because we're taking risk within equity markets. This is because we have a diversified portfolio of asset classes that are not just based on shares and bonds, but are also diversified across commodities, interest rates, and we're able to use tools such as futures and options to really mitigate that downside. This is a really exciting time to be this sort of investor because things aren't going to get better quickly. volatility is going to remain, and it's going to be different types of asset classes that drive returns. And that just creates a whole lot more opportunity for our income and growth portfolios. One aspect we're looking at now is really the effect of all this on currencies. And yes, currencies are part of most portfolios, but to be enabled to participate in that in a way that can generate returns for our growth and income investors is something that we're looking at, because the next cab off the rank is a strengthening US dollar, and what does that do to currencies outside of the US? So we are really positive and optimistic, and that seems strange given what's going on in share markets. But because we've got the tools to be able to navigate it, we think that the next 6, 12, 18 months are going to be a really interesting and potentially provide a lot of opportunities to generate returns, despite share markets not being in a overly optimistic place at the moment. So I hope that gave you some insights into where we're placed and what our thinking is. We obviously will continue to comment around our monthly reviews around how portfolios were positioned. But just to give you those numbers to the end of April, up 8% around 8% in for growth portfolios, and around 7% in income portfolios is an outstanding achievement given what's going on in financial markets, and something that hopefully gives people a lot of comfort despite the volatility. Hope you enjoyed Alex Sims. She's one of very few academics in New Zealand focusing on the sector, and hopefully we'll hear a lot more from her over the course of this year and years to come. Other than that, have a great week, everybody, and look forward to speaking with you same time,